welcome back to College Composition. Today we want to begin a paper called the narrative essay. You might remember that we've called this the change structure essay through all of our sessions and examples with outlining and paragraphing up until this point. The reason we call this narrative essay the change structure is because once you learn this structure, it's one that you can take to any class that you will have in the future. You can use it for a research class, say in physics. You could use it for a research class in a mechatronics class. After all, in what discipline don't things change constantly? So let's talk about the narrative essay. As you can see from the structure, we have our introduction and our conclusion as always. This is that structural outline. And paragraph 2 is before, paragraph 3 is event, and paragraph 3 is the result or change. Now, why do we have before, event, result? Well, if you really think about it, to understand any change fully, there are the three things that you have to know. If you're telling someone that something has changed you, they have to know what that thing that changed you is, that event. They have to know how you were before and how you're different after, or they don't really understand that a change has taken place. That's why we have the before, event, result in that structure. And if you remember the example that we used several times about the accident that made someone afraid to drive, before an accident, I love to drive. Event, the accident happened. Result, after the accident, I hate to drive or I'm afraid to drive. This structure works, as we said, say in a physics class. Suppose you're talking about how Einstein's general theory of relativity changed physics. Before, here was physics before Einstein's general theory of relativity. The event, this is Einstein's general theory of relativity. And the result, or after, this is how physics is different because of Einstein's general theory of relativity. So it's a structure that can be used again, and again. Now, the great thing about this structure, it has a very simple formulaic thesis. If you remember when we talked about thesis statements and outlining, we said that many thesis statements can be created using a formula. And the formula for the narrative or change structure is the event plus the change equals the thesis. Again, with that same example, car accident made me afraid to drive. Car accident made me hate driving. And that is the thesis. Whatever the change might be, you might say you went in the military and say boot camp made me a more responsible person. Before boot camp, I was irresponsible. Boot camp happened. As a result of boot camp, I am a more responsible person. Another example that a lot of people write about. Let's talk a little bit about the body and what types of details and examples are going to go in these body paragraphs. For the before section, this is how you were in relation to that thesis before the event. So if it's about driving, it's what you thought about driving before that event. You don't really talk much about the event itself in that paragraph. You just keep it to how you were in relation to the thesis before. The event section, if anything at all would seem like a story, if it would, the event would. These are all the details of whatever the event was. If it was boot camp, we had to get up at this time. We ran this much. We did this many push-ups. If it's an accident, where it happened, when it happened, what it felt like, how long it took to recover, those types of things. Remember, an essay isn't a story because the thesis is what keeps it from being a story. But that event paragraph, that is the one that will have most of the details. Now, when we get to the result or the change, this is usually the opposite of the before. So this is how you felt about driving before the accident. So this is how you felt about driving after the accident. Still relating to that thesis. And they're usually opposite. Again, with the boot camp example. Before I was irresponsible, the boot camp happened. After, I'm more responsible. Now, one of the difficult things about this essay is to really keep these things separate. You don't want your sections to bleed over on each other. You don't want to put a little bit of the before in the event, a little bit of the result in the event, not even really for transition. You can use transition words for that. And as we talked about before, for your topic sentences, before would be a good one for the before paragraph, and as a result of would be a good one for the result paragraph. Now, real quickly, let's get to the introduction and a conclusion. Now, we know, as we've said many times, our introduction goes from general to specific. So we open up that first folder for our reader, and we're leading down to this thesis about an event plus change. There's many contexts you can use to bring a reader in with this. You could just start with change. Change happens to us all. You could start with life events affect us whether we want them to or not. So it's up to you how broad you want to start. If this is your first paper, it might be a good idea to start very broad, just talking about change, and then slowly, if you remember when we talked about introductions, get more specific until you get to that thesis. So to review, we've got our narrative or change structure. We have our introduction. In our body, we have our before, our event, and our result, and then we have our conclusion. We have the formulaic thesis, the event plus the change equals the thesis, and we want to make sure to keep our body sections separate and not let them bleed over on each other. I hope you enjoyed this session and you'll use it to help you with your narrative essays. Next time we'll be looking at compare-contrast essays, and I'll see you then.